It was the winter of 1942, and deep inside the marble halls of the Reich Air Ministry in Berlin, Hermann Göring's patience had worn thin. Reports were flooding in from his intelligence officers. Stories of a mysterious British aircraft that seemed to appear out of nowhere, strike with surgical precision, and vanish before German fighters could even take off. At first, Göring dismissed it as propaganda. But the stories kept coming, and they were all the same. A twin-engine plane made of wood. Wood. The idea was insulting. Germany prided itself on the precision of its engineering. Polished metal, rivets, power, dominance. Yet here was Britain, battered by years of war, somehow fielding an aircraft faster than anything the Luftwaffe could catch. Göring was furious. "A wooden plane?" he roared during a morning briefing. "If that is true, then the English must be magicians." The truth, however, was even more extraordinary than he feared. Across the Channel, in a quiet corner of Hertfordshire, engineers at the de Havilland Aircraft Company had done what many believed impossible. Led by Geoffrey de Havilland, they had created the DH.98 Mosquito, a lightweight, unarmed bomber designed not for brute strength, but for speed and agility. It was a machine born out of necessity, a time when Britain's resources were stretched thin and aluminum was scarce. Instead of waiting for more metal, de Havilland turned to a different material: wood. Carpenters and cabinet makers from across England were recruited. Furniture factories were repurposed into aircraft workshops. Mahogany, birch, and balsa were layered together using a secret resin glue, forming a fuselage that was both strong and astonishingly light. When it first took to the skies in 1940, the Mosquito shocked everyone. It could outfly the Spitfire, and it could carry a bomb load equal to that of a medium bomber without a single defensive gun. Back in Berlin, Göring's analysts struggled to explain how such a thing was possible. Reconnaissance photos showed blurred outlines, a slim fuselage, wide wings, and twin engines that left Luftwaffe interceptors behind like they were standing still. German pilots nicknamed it the Wooden Ghost because radar rarely detected it, and it struck so quickly that anti-aircraft guns often never fired a shot. One night in early 1943, mosquitoes streaked across the sky toward Berlin itself. Their target, the broadcasting station where Göring was scheduled to speak. The raid didn't just damage the station, it humiliated him. Göring's radio address was cut off mid-sentence as explosions echoed through the capital. It was a calculated act of psychological warfare, and it worked perfectly. The next morning, Göring convened his generals in a rage. "They build them out of wood," he shouted, "and they fly rings around our fighters. I turn green and yellow with envy when I see the Mosquito." His words would later become infamous, a rare public admission of inferiority from one of Nazi Germany's most arrogant leaders. For the men of the RAF, the Mosquito was a symbol of ingenuity. Pilots spoke of how it responded like a living creature, smooth, fast, and utterly fearless. It could skim the treetops at 400 miles per hour, dive into a target with pinpoint accuracy, and be halfway home before the Luftwaffe even scrambled. To Göring, it was a nightmare. He ordered his engineers to copy it immediately. The Luftwaffe's top aircraft designers were summoned: Kurt Tank of Focke-Wulf and Ernst Heinkel himself. Their orders were simple: build me a German Mosquito. But what Göring didn't understand was that Britain's miracle was not just a machine, it was a mindset. It was born from flexibility, innovation, and the courage to defy convention. And those were qualities that Nazi Germany's rigid system no longer had. As the months passed, Göring's envy turned to desperation. His factories were being bombed, his resources dwindled, and yet the Mosquito kept coming low, fast, and unstoppable. Every time its engines were heard over German skies, they were a reminder that sometimes victory doesn't come from strength, but from imagination. By the end of 1943, the Mosquito had become a legend and Göring's obsession. In a war defined by steel and fire, it was the humble wooden aircraft that wounded his pride the most. The plane he once mocked had outsmarted his entire air force. And so, in his private moments, the Reichsmarshal would look to the sky and see a fleeting shadow, a flash of twin engines, a whisper of wings, and wonder how something so simple could make him feel so powerless. The wooden ghost had haunted him, and it wasn't done yet. By 1941, the de Havilland Mosquito had moved from secret experiment to frontline marvel. The skeptics were silenced the first time the wooden bomber raced past their metal fighters and simply disappeared into the clouds. What began as an engineer's gamble was now rewriting the rules of air warfare. From its first operational flight, the Mosquito proved that raw speed could be a weapon all its own. Its twin Rolls-Royce Merlin engines, the same power plants used in the Spitfire, pushed the sleek wooden frame to nearly 415 miles per hour, faster than any bomber in the world. The combination of low weight, perfect aerodynamics, and a smooth wooden surface gave it a performance that astonished even its own pilots. In November 1941, a pair of Mosquitoes carried out one of the most daring missions of the war, a daylight attack on the Gestapo headquarters in Oslo. German radar never caught them. Anti-aircraft guns opened fire only after the bombs were already falling. The aircraft roared home untouched, outrunning every interceptor sent against them. For the Luftwaffe, it was a warning. This was no ordinary bomber. At British airfields, young crews who had grown used to lumbering metal giants like the Wellington or Blenheim could hardly believe what they were flying. The Mosquito leapt down the runway with the grace of a fighter. It responded instantly to every touch of the stick. Pilots said it felt alive, like flying a thoroughbred horse. In the following months, the Mosquito's legend grew. It was faster than the German Bf 109 and almost as agile as the FW 190, yet it could carry a ton of bombs. Reconnaissance versions streaked over occupied Europe at altitudes beyond the reach of flak, photographing enemy factories, submarine pens, and rocket sites. Many of the war's most valuable intelligence images were taken by the lens of a Mosquito. The plane's wooden body gave it another unexpected advantage: stealth. Unlike metal aircraft, the Mosquito reflected very little radar signal. Early German detection systems, built to track heavy bombers, often failed to notice it until it was far too late. British crews joked that the Germans would need wooden radar to catch them. Inside the Reich Air Ministry, the reports infuriated Hermann Göring. His elite night fighter wings were helpless against the British ghosts that slipped through the dark. Factories, rail lines, and command centers that had once been considered safe deep inside occupied territory were suddenly within reach of the RAF. Göring complained bitterly that the Mosquito made the Luftwaffe look ridiculous. While the aircraft's speed was its shield, its precision became its sword. In September 1942, Mosquitoes of 105 Squadron struck the Gestapo's record center in Oslo again, this time to destroy files that identified members of the Norwegian resistance. The building was reduced to rubble. Nearby houses remained standing. No other bomber of the time could have done it. A year later, in one of the most symbolic operations of the war, Mosquitoes attacked the Berlin broadcasting station during Göring's own speech. The explosions cut his transmission live on air, leaving the Reichsmarshal shouting into silence. Across Britain, people listened on their radios and cheered. Every success pushed the boundaries of what wooden aircraft could do. Engineers introduced specialized versions: night fighters with radar, pathfinders that marked targets for heavy bombers, even unarmed reconnaissance planes that mapped enemy defenses from 25,000 feet. All relied on the same secret: lightness and speed. Pilots who flew it said that the Mosquito made them feel untouchable. could dive at over 500 miles per hour and climb out of reach before enemy fighters could react. In training films, instructors reminded crews, "Your guns are your throttles. Open them and run." And most of the time they did, outrunning everything the Luftwaffe could throw at them. By late 1943, the Mosquito had shattered an old belief that strength came from armor and guns. It showed that speed could be defense, and that precision could be more powerful than brute force. Its wooden frame, once mocked as a relic, had outperformed the most advanced metal machines Germany could build. In hangars across England, new squadrons prepared for missions that would take them over Berlin, Hamburg, and the heart of Nazi industry. The pilots polished the pale wooden skin of their aircraft with quiet pride. They knew they were flying something extraordinary, a machine that didn't just change tactics, but rewrote the physics of war itself. The age of faster than metal had arrived, and the world would never look at wood the same way again. The story of the Mosquito began not with an order from the British government, but with a daring idea, one that almost no one believed in. In 1938, as Europe edged closer to war, aircraft designers across the continent were racing to create faster, stronger, deadlier machines, all made of metal. Aluminum was the future, or so everyone thought. But one man saw things differently. His name was Geoffrey de Havilland, a quiet visionary who had already built some of Britain's most graceful aircraft. He believed that speed and simplicity could defeat brute force. Where others added armor and guns, de Havilland wanted to remove them. His dream was a fast, unarmed bomber that could simply outrun anything the enemy sent against it. The bomber that can't be caught, he called it. The Air Ministry laughed at the idea. A wooden bomber with no guns? One official scoffed. Suicide. The project was rejected, delayed, and pushed aside. But de Havilland refused to let it die. He and a small team began secretly working on their design at the company's quiet factory in Hatfield, outside London. They built it the old-fashioned way, not in steel foundries, but in carpentry shops filled with the scent of sawdust and varnish. When war broke out in 1939, Britain desperately needed aircraft. Metal was scarce, aluminum was reserved for fighters, and the Luftwaffe's bombing raids made every resource precious. That's when de Havilland's forgotten idea suddenly made sense. Wood was plentiful, and Britain had craftsmen who knew how to work it. So the Air Ministry reluctantly gave him permission to proceed. The Mosquito was reborn from scrap plans and stubborn faith. De Havilland's engineers took birch, balsa, and mahogany, materials normally used for furniture, and pressed them into elegant curves using a new secret adhesive called casein glue. The fuselage was molded in two halves, smooth and seamless, like the shell of a violin. It was both lightweight and astonishingly strong. The wooden structure absorbed radar waves, making the plane nearly invisible to early German detection systems. To build it, de Havilland called on the skills of Britain's civilian industries. Piano makers, cabinet builders, and even toy companies joined the war effort. In workshops across the country, ordinary men and women sanded, shaped, and glued pieces of the future. What emerged from their hands was something no one had ever seen, a warplane that looked like art. By late 1940, the prototype was ready. It gleamed in the morning sun. Twin engines, slender wings, and that unmistakable smooth wooden skin. The test pilot, Geoffrey de Havilland Jr., the designer's own son, climbed into the cockpit. As the engines roared to life, the wooden aircraft lifted off gracefully, climbing faster than anyone expected. When it landed, the test data shocked the Air Ministry. The Mosquito was not only faster than any bomber, it was faster than the Spitfire itself. Suddenly, the laughter stopped. Production orders came in quickly. The Air Ministry wanted reconnaissance versions, bombers, night fighters, anything de Havilland could make. The Wooden Wonder, as it came to be called, could carry a 4,000-pound bomb load, travel over 400 miles per hour, and fly higher than most interceptors. All of this built from materials that didn't even require strategic metals. But the early days weren't easy. Bombing raids threatened factories, glue shortages delayed production, and skeptics in high command still doubted that we could win a war. Yet de Havilland's team persisted. Workers often labored through the night, repairing damaged molds by candlelight, while air raid sirens wailed outside. And as the first Mosquitoes rolled out of the hangars in 1941, the world finally began to understand. These aircraft weren't fragile curiosities, they were thoroughbreds. They could race across occupied Europe, photograph enemy positions, strike precision targets, and vanish into the clouds before a single German fighter could reach them. The press called it Britain's wooden marvel. RAF pilots simply called it the Mossy. It was elegant, deadly, and completely unpredictable. A machine that embodied the very spirit of British defiance. From the hands of carpenters and craftsmen, born in a time of fear and scarcity, the Mosquito emerged as a triumph of imagination. It was proof that innovation could rise not from abundance, but from necessity, and that sometimes the simplest materials can create the most extraordinary results. As Geoffrey de Havilland watched his wooden dream soar across the sky, he must have known that history had just changed course. The age of the Wooden Wonder had begun, and the world would never look at wood the same way again. By 1943, Hermann Göring's frustration had turned into obsession. The Mosquito was everywhere, over Berlin, over the Ruhr, over his own headquarters. The Luftwaffe could barely react before the British wooden ghost had come and gone. Every week, new reports crossed Göring's desk describing yet another raid carried out by those fast, unarmed bombers. Each one was a blow to his pride. At last, Göring issued an order that echoed through the corridors of the Reich Air Ministry. "Build me our own Mosquito." He wanted a German aircraft that could match or surpass the British Marvel. The order went out to the country's top designers: Ernst Heinkel, Kurt Tank of Focke-Wulf, and the engineers of Junkers. They were told to create a wooden, twin-engine, high-speed fighter bomber. It had to be simple to build, light, and cheap, something Germany could mass-produce even under relentless Allied bombing. The idea sounded straightforward, but turning it into reality was another matter. Unlike Britain, Germany's war industry was rigid and centralized. Every design decision had to pass through layers of bureaucracy, party committees, and Göring's personal aides. Materials were scarce, labor was short, and the Allied bombing campaign was crippling production lines. The Luftwaffe's factories were already struggling to keep up with losses. Still, the order stood. The race to build a German Mosquito had begun. At Heinkel's factory in Rostock, engineers dusted off an old concept, the He-219 Uhu, a sleek night fighter that had potential. But it was too complex, too heavy, and relied on aluminum that Germany no longer had. So Göring turned to Focke-Wulf, where the brilliant Kurt Tank proposed something daring: a wooden twin-engine plane made from non-strategic materials. The project received the code name Ta-154, and on paper it looked promising: light, fast, and armed to the teeth. Tank envisioned a fighter that could challenge the Mosquito in every role: night interception, fast bombing, reconnaissance. Using plywood bonded with synthetic resin, the Ta-154's smooth skin mimicked the British technique. But there was a fatal difference: Germany didn't have the same glue. The British Mosquito used a secret formula produced by de Havilland's chemists, a casein-based adhesive refined to perfection. German suppliers tried to replicate it but lacked the key ingredients. When Allied bombing destroyed the only factory that made a comparable resin, engineers resorted to a new substitute known as tegofilm. It was unstable, corrosive, and dangerously unpredictable. Early prototypes of the Ta-154 flew well. Test pilots praised its speed and handling. For a brief moment, Göring felt vindicated. But the triumph didn't last. In mid-1944, one of the test aircraft disintegrated in midair when the glue holding its wings together literally dissolved. The crash killed the pilot and destroyed confidence in the project overnight. Göring raged. He blamed his engineers, his ministers, even the weather. But no amount of shouting could change the facts. Germany's attempt to copy the Mosquito had failed. The deeper problem ran beyond adhesives. The Luftwaffe's obsession with complexity and control made innovation nearly impossible. Each new aircraft was burdened by political interference, endless paperwork, and unrealistic demands. The British had succeeded precisely because they trusted a small team to work freely. Germany, by contrast, smothered its own talent. Still, Göring refused to admit defeat. He ordered further experiments, hybrid designs from Heinkel and Junkers, half-metal, half-wood contraptions that looked good on blueprints but never reached combat. By the time any were ready, the war had turned. Fuel shortages grounded squadrons, Allied bombers dominated the skies, and the wooden wonder that Göring sought to imitate was now striking targets inside Germany with impunity. In one of his final wartime speeches, Göring ranted bitterly about the Mosquito. "They build them from wood," he spat, "and they fly faster than our best fighters. The British make toys, and those toys make us look fools." His words were more than anger, they were confession. The Reichsmarschall, who once promised air supremacy for 1,000 years, had been outclassed by carpenters and cabinet makers. The German Mosquito never existed. The few Ta-154s that rolled out were grounded, dismantled, or destroyed in bombings before they could fly a single mission. And while Göring searched for someone to blame, British Mosquitoes continued to cross the night sky, smooth, silent, unstoppable. In the end, the Luftwaffe's imitation only highlighted the difference between arrogance and innovation. The British had built the Mosquito because they dared to think differently. Germany tried to copy it because it couldn't imagine anything new. The result was inevitable. One plane soared into legend, the other into oblivion. The Ta-154 was meant to be Germany's answer to the Mosquito, a wooden miracle that would reclaim the Luftwaffe's pride. On paper, it promised everything Göring wanted: light, fast, deadly, and made from non-strategic materials. In reality, it would become one of the war's most tragic and ironic failures. The project began with promise. Kurt Tank, Focke-Wulf's chief designer, was among Germany's most respected engineers. He had already created the superb FW-190 fighter, and he approached this new challenge with determination. Working from the Luftwaffe's desperate order, he designed a sleek twin-engine aircraft, crafted from laminated wood and bonded with resin adhesives. Tank's first prototype, the Ta-154V1, rolled out in the summer of 1943. It was elegant and streamlined, its twin Junkers Jumo engines giving it the graceful look of a Predator. When it took to the air over Bremen for its first flight, the results were astonishing. The wooden fighter climbed fast, handled beautifully, and reached speeds close to 400 miles per hour. For a moment, it seemed as if the impossible had been achieved. Göring was delighted. He ordered immediate mass production and boasted that the Luftwaffe would soon hunt the British Mosquitoes with their own kind. Newspapers called it the Mosquitojager, the Mosquito Hunter. But beneath the optimism, the cracks, literal and figurative, were already forming. Germany's war machine in 1943 was collapsing under pressure. Allied bombers hit factories, rail lines, and supply depots almost daily. Skilled labor was gone, replaced by untrained workers and forced laborers. Materials arrived late or not at all. The Luftwaffe demanded hundreds of Tu-154s per month, yet even the simplest parts were missing. And then came the fatal blow, the glue. The British Mosquito's success relied on a secret resin adhesive perfected through years of experimentation. The Germans tried to replicate it, but the only factory producing a similar chemical compound, the Tego film plant in Wuppertal, was destroyed by an RAF bombing raid in 1943. With the original formula lost, engineers turned to a substitute adhesive made by a chemical firm under wartime pressure. It looked the same. It even smelled the same. But it wasn't the same. The new glue contained acids that slowly ate through the wooden laminations. The first signs appeared during assembly. Wings warped under stress, fuselages cracked at the joints, and structural failures became common. Still, the program pressed forward. Time was running out and Göring demanded results. The propaganda ministry had already announced the Tu-154 as ready for combat. Then came the tragedy that sealed its fate. In mid-1944, during a routine test flight, the prototype Tu-154V3 took off from the Reckland Test Center. At 3,000 feet, one of its wings suddenly tore away. The aircraft rolled, broke apart, and crashed into the forest below. The pilot, a veteran test flyer, was killed instantly. Investigators found the glue joints had dissolved. The resin had literally eaten through the wood. The aircraft had come apart in the air. The disaster shocked even Göring's hardened staff. Kurt Tank was devastated. He had built a design worthy of success, but the materials and the system behind them had betrayed him. With the loss of the V3, confidence in the entire project evaporated overnight. Still, in the chaos of late-war Germany, production continued for a few months. A handful of Tu-154s rolled out, each slightly different, each plagued by defects. Some were assigned to night fighter units, but few ever reached operational status. The factories producing them were bombed repeatedly, and spare parts were impossible to obtain. By the autumn of 1944, the Tu-154 program was officially canceled. Göring's dream of a German Mosquito was dead. The surviving prototypes were scrapped, their wooden carcasses left to rot on airfields littered with the remains of other failed projects. In the end, the Tu-154 wasn't a bad aircraft. It was a victim of desperation. It symbolized everything that had gone wrong with the Luftwaffe: arrogance, disorganization, and blind faith in political orders over practical engineering. While the Mosquito soared across occupied Europe, striking precise targets and returning home unscathed, the Tu-154 never got the chance to fight. Its story was not one of combat, but of collapse, the collapse of an empire that tried to imitate genius instead of nurturing it. As Allied bombers roared over Germany in the final months of the war, their escorting Mosquitoes flew freely through the night skies. Somewhere below, among the smoking ruins of factories and workshops, the last fragments of the Tu-154 lay scattered, warped, brittle, and forgotten. The Mosquito hunter had become its own prey. By 1943, Hermann Göring, once the proud architect of the Luftwaffe, had become a man consumed by bitterness. The wooden British aircraft that he had mocked, the Mosquito, was humiliating him in front of the entire world. Every few weeks, it seemed, the wooden wonder was striking deeper into German territory, hitting targets that Göring had sworn were untouchable. First, he tried to laugh it off. Reports from radar stations spoke of small, fast intruders flying so high and so quickly that interceptors couldn't touch them. Göring dismissed them as exaggerated, until one crisp morning in January 1943, the impossible happened. A formation of Mosquitoes flew straight over Berlin, in broad daylight, at the very moment Göring was scheduled to deliver a speech celebrating the Luftwaffe's strength. The air raid sirens howled. Crowds scattered. The Reichsmarshal himself had to be rushed from the stage as bombs exploded nearby. The psychological blow was enormous. For the first time, the German capital had been bombed not by lumbering four-engine bombers, but by a handful of fast, wooden British planes. They came and went before a single German fighter could intercept them. Göring's pride cracked. In private meetings, his rage became legendary. He slammed his fist on tables, screaming that it was intolerable for the greatest air force on Earth to be mocked by an aircraft made of plywood. He demanded to know how the British had done it, and why his engineers couldn't match them. But the Luftwaffe was no longer the force he had built in the 1930s. Factories were in ruins, resources scarce, morale crumbling. His generals spoke cautiously, knowing that Göring's temper could ruin careers, or worse. Yet even they could not hide the truth. Germany had fallen behind. The Mosquito's speed and accuracy had shattered the myth of Luftwaffe supremacy. Göring's invincible air defense network was helpless against a plane that defied everything he believed in: light instead of heavy, unarmored instead of armored, fast instead of strong. Then came another humiliation. In January 1944, a squadron of Mosquitoes returned to Berlin to bomb the city during a live radio broadcast celebrating Göring's birthday. The interruption forced his speech off the air. The British had literally drowned out his voice. When the story reached London, British newspapers mocked the Reichsmarshal mercilessly. This time, Göring could no longer contain himself. In a fit of fury, he delivered one of his most infamous speeches to Luftwaffe officers. His words, captured by Allied intelligence, revealed the depth of his envy and despair. "It makes me furious when I see the Mosquito. I turn green and yellow with envy. The British, who can afford aluminium better than we can, knock together a beautiful wooden aircraft that every piano factory over there is building, while I cannot get one built in Germany." Those words spread through the ranks of both sides. Allied crews laughed. German engineers cringed. Göring had admitted what everyone already knew. The Luftwaffe was beaten not just by numbers, but by innovation. Behind his bluster, Göring was a man haunted by failure. Once admired as a World War I ace, now he watched as the air force he created disintegrated. Night after night, British bombers roared over the Reich. The Mosquito, small but unstoppable, symbolized his loss of control. He tried to respond with new projects: jet fighters, rocket planes, miracle weapons, but each came too late or failed under pressure. The Ta-154, the so-called German Mosquito, had already ended in disaster. Göring's dreams of revenge turned to ash. As 1944 dragged on, the wooden British aircraft he despised continued to humiliate him. Mosquitoes bombed Gestapo headquarters, harassed German night fighter bases, and even photographed Göring's own hunting lodge from above, just to prove they could. Every time the sirens wailed, Göring's subordinates knew what would follow. Another tirade, another scapegoat, another desperate order. The Mosquito had become a ghost in his mind, an elegant, wooden reminder that his power was slipping away. By 1945, as the Reich collapsed, Göring's envy no longer mattered. The wooden wonder he once ridiculed was now flying unchallenged across German skies, guiding Allied bombers to victory. In the end, Göring's words became his own epitaph: green and yellow with envy. The mighty Reichsmarschall, wrapped in medals and pride, had been undone not by a massive steel juggernaut, but by a light, graceful aircraft built in British carpentry shops. The Mosquito didn't just outfly Germany's best, it outthought them. And for Göring, that was the ultimate humiliation. By 1944, the de Havilland Mosquito had become a legend in the skies. What began as a daring experiment, a bomber made of wood, had grown into one of the most feared and versatile aircraft of World War II. The Luftwaffe had tried to copy it. Göring had raged against it. And yet, the Mosquito only became faster, stronger, and more unstoppable with every passing month. It was nicknamed the Wooden Wonder. Pilots loved it. Crews trusted it with their lives. German radar operators hated the sound of its engines. Too smooth, high-pitched Rolls-Royce Merlins that often appeared on their screens for only seconds before vanishing again. By the time anti-aircraft guns opened fire, the Mosquito was already gone. Unlike the heavy bombers that lumbered through the night sky, the Mosquito depended on speed and precision, not armor or firepower. It was lighter than anything else in the air, and that agility made it nearly untouchable. German night fighters struggled to intercept it, and flak batteries wasted thousands of shells trying to bring one down. Its missions were as bold as its design. The Mosquito carried out Pathfinder operations, marking targets for the massive Lancaster raids that followed. It flew low-level strikes against Gestapo headquarters in Oslo, Copenhagen, and The Hague, blasting through walls with pinpoint accuracy, sometimes within meters of civilian buildings, to free resistance fighters or destroy Nazi records. One of the most daring missions took place on February 18, 1944, when Mosquitoes from No. 21 Squadron streaked across France in broad daylight. Their target was the Amiens prison, where over 100 French resistance members awaited execution. Flying just feet above the snow-covered fields, the Mosquitoes smashed through the prison walls with surgical precision, freeing dozens of captives and shocking the German occupiers. In Berlin, the plane had become something of an obsession. Hermann Göring, the Luftwaffe's commander, raged publicly about it. He once shouted, "The British have the genius and we have the idiots," after hearing reports that Mosquitoes had bombed Berlin in daylight, twice, while German fighters couldn't even catch them. The raids were small, but their psychological impact was enormous. The mighty Luftwaffe, once Europe's terror, could not stop a plane made of wood and glue. Everywhere it flew, the Mosquito adapted. It became a reconnaissance aircraft, snapping high-resolution photos from 35,000 feet. It served as a night fighter, armed with radar and 420mm cannons that shredded enemy bombers in total darkness. It even became a fighter bomber, chasing trains, submarines, and convoys across occupied Europe. Its wooden frame, once mocked as fragile, turned out to be a secret weapon. Radar had difficulty detecting it. The lack of metal reduced its visibility, giving it a kind of stealth decades before the word existed. And unlike aluminum aircraft, the Mosquito could be built in furniture factories, carpentry shops, even converted barns. While German plants struggled under bombs, British carpenters quietly built the aircraft that would outfly the Reich. By late 1944, the Mosquito was flying more types of missions than any other Allied plane. Its crews became elite, confident, daring, often hand-picked for their precision flying. They joked that the Mosquito didn't carry armor because speed was the best protection. And time and again, that speed saved them. The statistics were staggering. For every Mosquito lost, dozens of enemy fighters were destroyed or diverted. It could outrun the Messerschmitt Bf 109 and the Focke-Wulf 190 at most altitudes. In fact, many Mosquitoes returned home with bullet holes in their wings, proof of close calls, yet still managed to land safely. The aircraft even played a secret role in deception. During the Allied invasion of Europe, Mosquitoes flew phantom raids, drawing German fighters away from the real targets. Their agility and range made them perfect for psychological warfare. Fast, unpredictable everywhere at once. By the end of the war, more than 7,700 Mosquitoes had been built in dozens of variants. They served in every major theater, from Europe to the Pacific, and their crews developed a deep affection for the plane. Many said it felt alive, like it wanted to bring them home. When victory finally came in 1945, the Mosquito had earned a reputation unlike any other. It wasn't just fast. It was elegant. It wasn't just deadly. It was intelligent. It had proven that innovation could outsmart brute force, that brains could beat brawn. The mosquito had not only survived Göring's envy, it had humiliated it. Long after the war ended, test pilots continued to fly the remaining mosquitoes. They marveled that a machine built largely of birch, balsa, and glue had rewritten the rules of aerial warfare. In an age obsessed with steel and power, a wooden aircraft had shown what imagination could do. The mosquito was unstoppable, not because it was invincible, but because it was born from belief. The belief that simplicity, courage, and creativity could triumph over fear and arrogance. And in the shadow of Göring's envy, that belief took flight, faster than metal, higher than hate, and straight into history.